from Rilke, from Letters to a Young Poet. And your doubt can become a good quality if you train it. It must become knowing. It must become criticism. Ask it whenever it wants to spoil something for you, why something is ugly. Demand proofs from it. Test it, and you will find it perhaps bewildered and embarrassed, and also protesting. But don't give in, insist on arguments, and act in this way attentive and persistent every single time. And the day will come when, instead of being a destroyer, it will become one of your best workers, perhaps the most intelligent of all the ones that are building your life. Well, anyway, some say that we have exited the information age and entered the age of confusion. What do you think? Do you think they might have a point? Have you felt this? It's something about information overload or like too many ethical conundrums. Have you guys heard of this thing, decision fatigue? It's kind of hot right now. It's really popular to have because there are so many decisions that require like our whole heart and mind. But these instruments are not made to handle that many, right? The machinery of this type of factory sort of wears down if you throw too many ethical conundrums at it. One of the other things is that the information age with our cool technological stuff, like that's really neat. But one of the things that you realize pretty soon is that if you have more access to information, you also have more opportunities for misinformation or disinformation campaigns. Have you heard about this? Some, countries hacking elections or something along those lines, right? So we're in one of those double-edged sword situations, right? You could use the internet to find, a sermon on the top 10 ways to reverse climate change, and then you could go out there and get to work. But you could also get swamped under this deluge of cognitive dissonance just coming at you from every side, and that might also become very exhausting and confusing for a person. Can you relate? Okay, I'm just making sure, because I feel it. I don't know where I heard this. I looked up on the internet, age of confusion, like I thought it was a statement. I didn't find anything. But wherever I heard it, it stuck in my, I think we're in the age of confusion. We had the space age, right? That lasted from 1960 to 1980 or something. And then we entered the information age, and I think we've entered the age of confusion. Okay. Oh yeah, so last week I presented this quote. I heard it in a talk that I was attending. I'm still looking for the authorship, but it said something along the lines of, there's far more than enough evidence to prove any assertion. Or so it's kind of this philosophical thing. And I said, well, not really though. But emotionally, have you ever been in a relationship and you just had a beef with someone? Your mind can find all sorts of evidence to confirm your beef. Isn't it true? Right? And some of that evidence is made up. Some of that, if they it's morning, it's 6 a.m., and then at 6:15 they bring you a cup of coffee, and then all the evidence shifts toward the positive. What I was thinking, right? So there's plenty of evidence you can gather emotionally to confirm a certain position. And then I also, thinking this week, I was like, that quote really also works for the internet. Some of us have standards to what we'll call evidence, but a large percentage of Earth's population does not. Right? We'll talk about that in a minute. So you can find evidence for a lot of stuff on the internet. Let's see if that's my slide. Yes, I found some evidence for you here. I'm going to show the kids at home since we're talking internet. Here we go. Yes, we have proven Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are the Illuminati, mass governmental control. Because, can you see the triangle? That's a symbol. That's an Illuminati symbol. It's like a dog whistle or whatever animal the Illuminati are. No, but when we get into these modes, have you found sometimes, let's not blame other people, but for yourself, people are, well, you're seeing this, and that means that, and our minds start to go like, that could mean that. I wonder if it does. And we can start to gather somebody has argued for almost every position possible on the internet, right? And I mean, Google may be trying some draconian, or maybe on the way, pardon me, sorry Google, Siri, close your ears, or plutocratic ways of filtering the information we get for us. We'll filter it for you. So you don't have to read through all of the non-factual information. We'll tell you which information is good. Right? Facebook will do it for you in an echo chamber style. So although I do like they seem to have a little fact checker and then they give a source for the fact check. So I'm kind of cool with that. But there's still, for the last 10 years or something like that, Facebook tends, a little more recently, they tend to feed you articles and things according to what you already like. So you get this snowballing echo chamber effect that the news you get, the evidence you're receiving, tends to confirm the evidence you already have. This is really kind of interesting. And I think a lot of this leads to the possibility that the age of confusion will continue. So here's some evidence for you. And even though we've been told otherwise, I think we, maybe in this congregation, if you knew what Unitarian and Universalist congregations were before you came, then you probably don't believe it just because it's on TV anymore, right? We used to, right? Well, that's Dr. Smoke's Lucky Strikes because they're the best cigarettes to cure your lung problems. But I think a lot of us don't believe, like Exxon's reports on climate change. I don't think we believe it because somebody puts on a tie and says it from behind a thing. Uh-oh, I might be undermining my own authority here. Yikes. But we don't just believe on that. But I don't think that is popular yet in the world. So, and some of us, we'll get to this in a second, but some of us, even with that mindset, we see it on the internet and it hits one of our innate human biases. And then we do tend to believe it because it seems like authority. It feels like authority. So there's a lot of information to sort. There are a lot of angles and perspectives. And the other cool thing is that information is ethically neutral. So even if you like evidence, right? Well, I'm going to get down to the heart of this. And I have these news sources that are pretty trustworthy, and then I have these scientific papers. This journal tends to publish peer-reviewed stuff that I think is pretty trustworthy. That information, though, is ethically neutral. It doesn't really tell you how to live a good life. So even while you're gathering what are the causes of this, what are the factors that contribute to that, you're still stuck with sorting all of that and debating probably with other good-hearted people who have a completely different stance on certain things that could affect the course of our entire city, county, country, or world. Oh yeah, and then did I mention that the problems, the intractable problems that we face, that we're trying as little individuals to figure out, are global in scale. Like they might be mass extinction level issues that we're trying to tackle with our phones. Okay, so that's why I made this sermon called Surviving the Age of Confusion. Okay, why is this a problem? Let's see. Oh yeah, because one of the big things that I wanted to point out, I'm really into, also very hot right now, heuristics. It's fun to say. Boys and girls, would you like to say heuristics? Rolls right off the tongue. What is a heuristic? Any of you scholars working with heuristics? Well, oh, it's right up there. Could have got easy points and none of you shot your hands up. All right. A heuristic, according to the TV, says a mental shortcut that helps us make decisions and judgments quickly. A mental shortcut that helps us make decisions and judgments quickly. So this is kind of cool. Like we do this like with humans and stuff. The mind is set up there. I forget the exact figures, but there are trillions of bits of information that are coming into our senses, that our senses can pick up, but our brain can only sort billions. And so it has to make some snap, because how quick is perception? Like, it's in little milliseconds. So in these milliseconds, the brain has to decide which bits are relevant, which bits are not relevant. And it does that by going, oh yeah, that outline usually means a human, so I'm going to go human on that. Oh, that type of language usually means someone's going to verbally abuse me, so I'm going to react to that. Oh, this usually means something trustworthy, so I'm going to react to that. And then we've got even these instinctual ones, right? Like shiny and dingy usually mean a reward is coming somehow. And so internet programmers use that to hack your brain and keep you scrolling with intermittent rewards. Really cool. So we've got these shortcuts in our brain. The most popular one right now is the availability heuristic. Would you show me with your hands if you've ever heard of this availability heuristic? Okay, you're listening to the same podcast as me. Good. And I get to actually tell you something. So availability heuristic, roughly translated, is we tend to value information or retrieve information based on how easy it is to remember. So if you've been exposed to like news about shark attacks, for example, this is an example they often use, you'll tend to think shark attacks, death by shark attack, injury by shark attack, really kind of scary, that could happen in Santa Cruz, is really, really common. But it's only like 1/10 as common as injury and death by horse attacks. But you don't hear about horse attacks, do you? So nobody goes like, I don't want to go to the petting zoo. But they do go, let's not go to Santa Cruz, because it could be, I don't know, I have a healthy fear of some sharks and what. But how we weigh those decisions, especially decisions based on risk, tends to be like, well, have I heard anything about that? So our mind, it's this little trick, right? It's pretty useful in a lot of cases, but maybe not in the age of confusion, read propaganda, misinformation, plutocratic article sorting, things like that, right? So our mind tends to say, like, how at risk are we from violence from immigrants? Not the big spooky immigrants. Oh my gosh. Right? Your mind will sort that risk based on probably what news media outlet you follow and how often you heard about violence from immigrants versus contributions from immigrants, right? This person this Nobel Peace Prize winner who immigrated to the United States, et cetera, versus these other things. And so we're dealing with a world constructed largely through our availability heuristic. How easy is it? So if somebody says, they're not bringing their best, they're violent, they're other things that I won't repeat in this public space, then whether your mind goes, yeah, I think that's right, depends on how easy it is to remember an example of that. Make sense? Availability heuristic, right? So we've also got like confirmation bias. You've heard of this. These are innate human biases. So confirmation bias says if you hold an assumption, you're likely to filter evidence through your senses that confirms that assumption rather than denies it. Why? Because how good does it feel to be assured, correct, know your path, versus how good does it feel to be doubtful, murky, or confused, right? So because we want to feel good, do you? I do. All the time if I could. We tend to avoid confusion, and that leads us to feel really comfortable with confirmation bias, my side bias, and availability heuristic, because it paints an image of the world that is a world we know. That looks right, and we make decisions based on that feeling of rightness inside. The other interesting thing about the age of confusion is that when you're confronted by such an onslaught of information, has anyone experienced this like just think about diet, right? Let's ask, is saturated fat good for you? Let's ask the internet. And I don't know, maybe if it's filtering according to you, you'll get something that confirms first, but then if you keep scrolling, then you'll get, this research showed that vegans are the longest lived people. And then another guy's article is like, yeah, but what's the quality of their life? Because this research shows this. And you go like, yeah, but saturated fats from animals are contributing to climate change because of this. And they'll go like, yeah, but have you thought about pasture-raised bison with carbon regenerative something or other? And in the face of such an onslaught of information, most of our minds do this interesting thing. We dig a little way in, and then the mind goes like, have you ever had to read a terms of agreement for like an Apple? So we go, the terms of agreement are blah, 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 for I disavow Apple does any responsibility for such and blah, 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 blah. Oh my gosh, there's 9 more pages. Agree. We tend to do that with information. We read the first 2 paragraphs, and then our gut goes, do I agree or disagree with this? And we decide based on our gut. This might be a really big problem when we're faced with, what were they, mass extinction level, global, intractable ethical issues. Okay, let's make it even more nuanced, shall we? Okay, so this is just an image. I'll read these in case you can't read them, but this comes from this system you may know I'm a fan of called spiral dynamics from Harvard researcher Claire Graves. And I like the work of the philosopher Ken Wilber. If you want to look up any of this stuff, he's a little too weird for some people, but I really dig him. So anyway, in spiral dynamics, they say our moral, ethical, intellectual, spiritual, social development goes through certain definable waves of development. So for example, some of us at certain times in our lives have been largely in a mythic membership level of development. The most important sort of center of gravity is our group or our myth. Right? So if I bring you new evidence, it's going to be filtered through how does this match up to what my group thinks? How does this match up to our dominant myth? So you've heard maybe my country, right or wrong. Have you heard this? Right? This slogan, this is a mythic membership slogan. Because for a lot of us, it's like, okay, my country, and it's going to be right, or I'm going to change it. Right? Without that, you get, if you don't like it, you can leave. Right? Because dissent is unending, right? So, but if you understand, this is a level of development that's very appropriate to a third grader, right? What's your school mascot? We're the Tigers. What's your family? We're the Johnsons. What do you family? Every Sunday we have 3 o'clock dinner, and every Saturday we have brunch. We're the Johnsons. That's so healthy. That's so healthy. But when you go, we're America, and we're largely a European culture who never immigrated and took the land over from the savages who lived here, that's very unhealthy. And yet, full-grown adults espouse these views, do they not? They are mythic views. There's no evidence for the fact that that's a myth. It's a myth. But because it provides such safety and security, which is great for a third grader, it can lodge in our consciousness if we need that type of safety and security. Okay, then if you do well in third grade and have secure attachment figures at some point in your life, you will likely grow to rational, which is like all through junior high and high school, where you start to think about, well, we're the Tigers at my school, but where did that come from? Oh, in 1935, a man named Eldridge really thought tigers were a great animal, and so he's, and you start to learn the causes behind it, and that becomes really cool. This is where a lot of us, you probably sit. You can see grown-ups do this, and this is where you'll bring up a conversation, and more progress is always the answer. Oh, climate change, don't worry about it so much because we'll just spray stuff in the sky that reflects the sunlight. Well, do you think there will be any downstream effects? Well, no, it's science. All of our progress thus far hasn't had any downstream effects. And so, what if we just progress, not bad, but there are limits to this type of, we found the cause. So they say most of us then, but do you know people like this? They found the cause. I read an article on Forbes that confirmed what I thought about things, and now I know the answer. You who are confused, you who are sad, it's just because you do not know the answer. I can give you a logical train of voyeuristic arguments to tell you why you're wrong and I'm right, and then we can all relax and the answer there. We realize that there are a lot of different perspectives that matter, and a lot of what happens in this postmodern level is that we view everything through the lens of social justice and holistic thinking. So what's interesting, I wanted to just present this. You could give lectures for days and days on these things, and it is actually quite fun if you're a nerd like me. But what happens is that depending on where your center of gravity is, your biases will select the information that confirms that center of gravity. So any conversation you bring up, someone who's in the sort of postmodern, I don't know if that's a great title for it or whatever, but that's what they called it, wave, every conversation you bring up is a conversation about social justice. Have you noticed this? Do you have a friend like this? We're here in Northern California. You probably have a buddy like this. Okay? Hey, you want to come over? We're having wine later and eating crackers. And they'll spin that into who's being harmed by having wine and eating crackers. Well, that was awkward silence. Okay. Whereas your friend in Mythic membership could spin wine and crackers into something that's like, my religion or my political view is right or wrong, right? And your scientist friend, they're usually pretty benevolent. They're like, well, does the wine have sulfites in it or not? Well, all wine has sulfites in it. It's just a matter. So, I'm having vodka. It's ketogenic. I'm on the keto diet, so we're doing shots all the time.
But Russia helped Trump get elected, so there you go with your vodka.
Gotta go bourbon.
Oh wait, was that postmodern? I think that was postmodern. You can't drink vodka, you're a bot. You're a Russian bot.
Polish bot.
Okay.
Maybe we just invited to the wrong party.
We can do this all day. It's really quite fun. And all I want to say is that do we get the vibe that according to where your center of gravity is, you could start an argument about just about anything and gather evidence that supports that perspective. So what's proposed by Graves and Wilbur is that this one that they call integral is this development in our consciousness where you no longer stay stuck in only one perspective. So you can be a social justice advocate who doesn't believe the myths of people who hold harmful views, but you can sort of see how they got there. Like, yeah, if I was raised the way you were raised, I would be stuck in that myth too, right? It doesn't necessarily believe that spraying stuff in the atmosphere is the solution for climate change, but you can see, oh, that's how you got there. If we don't do this interesting thing happens is that we're stuck believing everyone else is crazy. And I know I'm speaking largely to liberals, and I listen to plenty of liberal news media, so I know that they say that to themselves in our heads a lot. Why is everyone else crazy? And I was inspired by this research I'm doing on empathy, where my teacher was advising us, when someone have you ever had someone come to you in a state of high emotion and need to tell you what you did wrong or something like that? The mind's tendency is to go, whoa, they're crazy. That's not what happened at all. But in this training of developing empathy, let's say it's somebody you love who's coming to talk to you, what we have to do is suspend that and learn to say, from their perspective, what they're saying and feeling makes perfect sense. From their perspective, what they're saying and feeling makes perfect sense. So this is not to say, let's go extreme, because like the argument is, so you're saying I should empathize with Nazis. Well, yeah, actually I am saying. But you got to remember, empathy doesn't mean condoning. Empathy doesn't mean allowing. Empathy doesn't mean failing to obstruct. Empathy means opening your heart and understanding. If I had suffered the way you had suffered, I might come up with some crazy notion like that too. And why should we do this? But why? Why shouldn't I punch them? Instead, well, first, it's not an either or. But second, on a larger scale, everything that can't take another's perspective is a contributor to culture wars. So even if you have better evidence, right? I think holistic social justice thinkers who get, agro-forested fair trade coffee and only drink that out of paper reusable bags that they take to the store every time. I think those people are more right. Don't get me wrong. But if your only stance is that my answer is right and everyone else is nuts, we cannot have constructive conversations with each other. Right? We can't do the work of explaining why you need to grow coffee under the shade of trees and stop chopping them all down to raise beef instead. That conversation will never happen. We're having a conversation instead about whether mythic consciousness is better than rational consciousness is better than social justice consciousness. And that conversation will go round and round and round because all we're going to do is argue ourselves deeper into the trench of our biases. This is not an escape from the age of confusion. Thanks for listening. So how do we get there is the first question. Well, the good news, according to this philosopher I love, Ken Wilber, is he says that exposure to this information is psychoactive. Not like, well, the research says actually maybe like LSD. But I mean, it activates your psyche. When we start to think about, oh, where am I entrenched? Am I in a bunker? Or start using, which of my friends are in a bunker? Who do I know that's stuck? When you think about it in this way, it starts to untangle the ability of the mind to get stuck in our biases. Because like it or not, you are biased too. And the sooner we realize that, the sooner we can bring an honest self to these confusing, morally ambiguous conversations that we need to have if we're going to dig our way out of the age of confusion into something brighter and more beautiful. Speaking about availability heuristic, Kahneman says, people tend to assess the relative importance of issues by the ease with which they are retrieved from memory. And this is largely determined by the extent of coverage in media. I was listening to the TED Radio Hour, my favorite little podcast from 2 weeks ago. You should listen to it, I think. It's called Digital Manipulation. And the first speaker talks about the Brexit vote and how they went around and interviewed people, and most of the people that they interviewed in London and other big cities in England said, I don't understand how this happened. No one I know was in favor of voting this way. This is wild. I don't understand how this happened. And then they went to these rural areas where factories had been shut down and things like that. And they talked to people and they say, oh yeah, I voted to exit the EU. Well, why? Well, because I was really afraid of all of this immigration, these Turkish immigrants, how immigrants are ruining our country, right? And then the researchers looked around at the population of immigrants in these communities, and there were virtually no immigrants in these communities. And so they said, well, where did you get your information about these immigrants? Oh, well, I saw it on Facebook. I saw it on Google. Right? So they tried to take a look at, well, who put this information out? And you can't because it was an advertisement, which is completely anonymous on Facebook. So you can put out any message you want as long as you can pay for it, and it'll target people who already hold that bias, and then there's no record of who or from what country targeted. So in Britain, the interesting thing, you can listen to the talk yourself, but I've just given you most of it, is that they've had laws for like 100 years about how much money you can spend in an election. Because people used to walk around with wheelbarrows full of cash to buy votes. So they outlawed that. And the internet has circumvented that entirely by playing on availability bias, or availability heuristic, negativity bias, confirmation bias altogether. And so they've just undone 100 years of political change through advertisement. Really high stakes in hacking these biases. Okay, so that's cool. So I got 3 rules, and I've got just enough time to give them to you. 3 rules for surviving the age of confusion. Are you ready?
Yes.
Oh, phew. Number 1, assume everyone is a bot. What is a bot? Well, I have this friend. You shouldn't do this, but I have a friend on the internet who anytime someone brings up an uncomfortable talking point, they go like, you're a Russian bot. And it's because they have these like bot farms, right? Where you don't even have to have physical trolls on the internet saying nasty things about people. They now have robots who will say nasty things on the internet just on cue, right? So you can proliferate all sorts of nasty things on the internet without having to have man or woman power. It's probably men, though. You don't have to have people typing into the thing. So I was inspired by this scene from The Matrix, if you ever saw this movie. Anyway, it's spooky sci-fi. You know, the guy's walking along, and this pretty girl walks by, and his mentor is like, "Are you listening to me, or are you still thinking about the pretty girl who walked by?" Oh, he says, "Look again," and the pretty girl has turned into one of the agents of the Matrix. And the theory, they say, anybody who hasn't been unplugged can be turned into one of the agents of the overwhelming propaganda machine. So anyone you meet could be giving you information that has been spun out of an overwhelming propaganda machine. It's uncomfortable, but if we learn to live with clarity of awareness, rather than sort of, it seems more comfortable to assume that we can just relax and just trust some sources of information. But we actually have to have our critical awareness on at all times. Assume anyone who talks to you in person or on the internet may just be conveying a party line that someone wants you to believe. And it might even be you. You too might be the bot. And in order to do this, we need to learn to surrender our knee-jerk reactions. So if we're going to survive the age of confusion, the reason it's an age of confusion is because we're being jerked around by our knee-jerk reactions. Okay, rule number 2, stay curious. So I like this word curiosity because I painted this picture of uncertainty, and then, oh, I'm uncertain. We have to have something else. If we surrender my side bias, negativity bias, availability heuristic, confirmation bias, and all of these things, we're searching for certainty, and it makes the world more confusing. The more we constrict and grasp to a certainty that we can react from, the more confusing the world gets. If we create a ministry of doubt, joyful doubt, or expansive curiosity, we have a chance to navigate these strange streams of, out of some surfing metaphor and whitewater rafting metaphor. Okay, and number 3, running out of time, I could have thought of something really cool, but we're out of time. Is that if we're going to survive, we have to survive together. It's one thing, this is part of my growth as a minister to a UU congregation. Once upon a time in America, I could preach sermons about how to improve yourself, how to have a good family life for us. And I think we've realized that if we're going to survive, we have to survive together, which means we have to learn how to invite curiosity in others. Our knee-jerk reactions may call us to call out another person when they have spurious evidence. They may invite us to slam another person, to own them. I owned them on the internet today. I called them a bot. That was the end of it. But have we invited curiosity in those with whom we are interacting? We need to learn this art of first generating empathy without condoning. We can empathize with a person without joining them in their hateful views. And from the place of empathy, we can invite them to rise from the ugly and horrendous view they're holding into some place that looks at evidence together and finds a solution with which we can all live. Okay, I'd like to end you with 2 quotes. The first one is from the internet. It says, a philosopher is a person who knows less and less about more and more until he knows nothing about everything. And the last one, my guiding principles for surviving the age of confusion, comes from Children Trumper Rinpoche, who says, the bad news is that you're falling through the sky at 1,000 miles per hour with nothing to hold on to. The good news is, there is no ground. So with that, let's stand and sing.